Marcus Cole stood in the center of the great hall with his hands locked behind his back in heavy metal cuffs that hummed with energy fields designed to stop even the strongest beings from breaking free. The Galactic Coalition Tribunal stretched before him like a nightmare made real, with 7 alien judges sitting high above on platforms of polished stone and glowing crystal, and each one of them looked down at him with eyes that held nothing but cold hatred. He was 23 years old, and he was about to die for doing the right thing. Charges had been read out in a voice that echoed through the massive chamber, and Marcus had listened to every word without showing any emotion on his face, because he knew that was exactly what they wanted, and he refused to give them the satisfaction. Insubordination, they called it, when he had stepped between Admiral Vethkora and the young Korvath ensign. The Admiral had been beating assault on a superior officer. They named it when Marcus had broken 3 of the Admiral's limbs to stop him from killing the girl. Embarrassment and a diplomatic representative, they declared it, because the whole thing had happened in front of dozens of witnesses from a dozen different species. Marcus remembered the moment perfectly, and it played in his mind like a video that would never stop repeating. The Admiral had been screaming at the ensign named Nira, who had made some small mistake in her duties, and his forearms had been striking her again and again, while she curled up on the floor trying to protect her head. Nobody had moved to help her, because Vethkora was powerful and connected, and everyone knew that crossing him meant the end of your career, or worse. But Marcus had moved without thinking, because that was what humans did when they saw someone being hurt, and before anyone could stop him, he had crossed the room in 3 quick steps and grabbed the Admiral's upper right arm and twisted it until the bone snapped like a dry branch. The fight had lasted less than 30 seconds, and by the end of it, the Admiral was on the ground with 3 broken limbs, and Marcus was standing over him, breathing hard, while everyone in the room stared in shock. Humans were not supposed to be that fast or that strong, or that willing to throw everything away for a stranger. Now Marcus stood before the tribunal and waited to hear his fate. Admiral Vethkora watched from the gallery with his arms in healing tubes and his mandibles clicking together in a sound that Marcus had learned to recognize as cruel satisfaction. The lead judge was a tall, thin being with silver skin and no visible eyes, who spoke in a voice like wind through dead leaves. Marcus Cole of Earth, you have been found guilty of all charges, and the tribunal has decided your sentence. Marcus kept his face blank and his spine straight, because he was a soldier, and soldiers did not show fear. You will be transported to the planet designated Nexus 7 and left there with standard survival equipment, and you will remain there for the rest of your natural life. A murmur went through the assembled crowd, because everyone knew what Nexus 7 was: the graveyard of fools, they called it, and the no-return planet, and the place where the galaxy sent people it wanted to forget. In 300 years of galactic expansion, 47 criminals and prisoners had been dropped on that world, and not a single one had survived past the second rotation around its sun. The planet was a death world of the highest category, with an ecosystem full of apex predators and toxic atmosphere, pockets and electromagnetic storms that destroyed any technology more advanced than a simple torch. Nothing lived there that was not designed by evolution to kill, and nothing that was dropped there ever came back. Marcus heard the sentence and felt something cold settle in his chest, but he did not let it show on his face. He looked up at the judges and then turned his head to look at Admiral Vethkora in the gallery, and he saw the alien's mandibles spread wide in what passed for a smile among his species. This was what the Admiral had wanted all along, and Marcus understood that now. With perfect clarity, the trial had been a formality, and the outcome had been decided before it even began, because Vethkora had connections and power, and he wanted Marcus dead in the worst way possible. Not a quick execution, but a slow death on a world that would tear him apart piece by piece. Marcus turned back to face the judges, and he spoke for the first time since the trial began. I understand. That was all he said, because there was nothing else to say. The guards came forward to lead him away, and as they walked in toward the exit, Marcus caught the eye of his former captain across the room. Captain Thrall was a Tellurian with 4 eyes and rough gray skin, and he had served with Marcus for 2 years and had tried everything in his power to stop this trial from happening. The captain's 4 eyes blinked in a pattern that Marcus recognized from their time serving together. Survive, that was the message, and Marcus gave the smallest nod in response before the guards pulled him through the door and into the corridor beyond. 26 hours later, Marcus sat in a drop pod, barely large enough to hold his body, and watched through a tiny window as the planet Nexus 7 grew larger and larger beneath him. The world was beautiful in a terrible way, with swirling red and purple clouds and vast dark oceans and continents covered in jungle so thick it looked like a solid mass of green and black. His equipment was packed around him in the tiny space, including a survival kit and a combat knife and a few days' worth of rations and a small emergency beacon that was supposed to allow him to call for help. The beacon was broken, of course, and Marcus had noticed that the moment he picked it up because the damage was too clean and too precise to be an accident. Someone had made sure he would have no way to call for rescue. The pod hit the atmosphere and began to shake as heat built up around it, and Marcus closed his eyes and thought about Earth and his family, and the life he would never get to live. Then the pod slammed into the jungle with a force that knocked the breath from his lungs, and when he opened his eyes again, he was surrounded by darkness and the sounds of creatures moving through the trees. Marcus kicked open the pod door and stepped out into the hot, wet air of Nexus 7, and he looked up at the alien sky through a gap in the canopy, and he made himself a promise. He was not going to die on this world. He was going to survive, and he was going to find a way off this planet, and he was going to make Admiral Vethkor pay for what he had done. The jungle screamed around him with the voices of 1,000 predators, and Marcus smiled into the darkness because he was human, and humans did not know how to give up. This was not his grave. This was his beginning. The survival manuals that Marcus had studied during his training said that a human could last 72 hours on a Category Omega death world with standard equipment. Marcus made it through the first night by climbing a tree that turned out to be alive in ways he had not expected. The bark shifted under his hands, and something that felt like a mouth opened near his leg, and he had to fight his way free with his combat knife while the whole tree shook and groaned and tried to pull him into its trunk. He fell 30 meters and landed in a river that was not water, but something thicker and warmer that burned his skin wherever it touched. By the time he dragged himself onto the bank, he was bleeding from a dozen cuts, and his clothes were half melted, and he could hear things moving toward him through the darkness. 6 different predators had picked up his scent in the first hour, and now they were circling closer and waiting for him to slow down or make a mistake. Marcus did not slow down. He moved through the jungle like a ghost, using every trick he had ever learned about survival and evasion, and he kept his knife in his hand and his eyes always scanning the shadows around him. The first predator that attacked him was a snake-like creature as thick as his leg, with a head full of teeth that could have bitten through steel. Marcus killed it by letting it strike at him and then grabbing it behind the head and driving his knife through its skull before it could coil. Around him, the second predator was some kind of insect, the size of a dog, with mandibles that dripped with venom. Marcus crushed it under a rock and kept moving. Third and fourth predators were pack hunters that worked together to try and corner him against a cliff face. Marcus found a gap in the rocks and squeezed through, and the creatures were too big to follow. The fifth predator gave up and went looking for easier prey after Marcus hit it in the eye with a thrown stone. But the sixth predator was different. It was huge and easily the size of a small shuttle, with 6 powerful legs and a body covered in overlapping scales that shimmered with soft light in the darkness. Its head was split into 3 sections that could open and close like a flower, and inside were rows and rows of teeth that looked like they could tear through anything. Marcus called it a shadow cat in his mind, even though it looked nothing like any cat he had ever seen, because it moved with that same quiet, deadly grace that cats had, and it watched him with eyes that reflected light like mirrors. The creature followed him for 3 days. It never attacked, and it never got too close, but it was always there at the edge of his vision, moving through the shadows. Like smoke, Marcus tried to lose it a dozen times, but the shadow cat always found him again on the 3rd day, when Marcus was weak from hunger and exhaustion, and his wounds were starting to get infected. The creature finally made its move. It came out of the darkness like a living nightmare, and Marcus barely had time to raise his knife before it was on him. The fight lasted 11 minutes. Marcus used every dirty trick that Earth had ever taught its soldiers about fighting larger opponents. He went for the eyes and the joints and the soft spots where the scales did not cover, and he fought with a fury that came from knowing that if he lost, he would die alone on a world that nobody would ever remember. The shadow cat was faster and stronger, and its claws could cut through his protective vest like it was made of paper. It cracked 3 of his ribs with a single bite and tore open his shoulder with one swipe of its massive paw. But Marcus kept fighting because that was all he knew how to do. He stabbed the creature in the neck and the leg and the side, and each time his knife found flesh, the shadow cat screamed in a voice like tearing metal. Finally, they both collapsed in the mud, too wounded and too exhausted to continue. Marcus lay on his back and stared up at the alien sky and tried to breathe through the pain in his chest. Shadowcat lay a few meters away and watched him with those mirror eyes, and neither of them had the strength to finish what they had started. Truce, Marcus said through broken teeth and blood. The creature made that sound again, like metal being torn apart, and somehow Marcus knew that it was agreeing. Over the next few days, something changed between them. Marcus shared his last rations with the wounded creature, even though he needed every bit of food to survive. He used his dwindling medical supplies to clean the Shadowcat's wounds and wrapped them with strips torn from his own clothes when a pack of smaller predators smelled their blood and came to finish them off. Marcus and the Shadowcat fought side by side. The human and the beast moved together like they had been partners for years, and the pack hunters died one after another until the rest fled into the darkness. After that, the Shadowcat started sleeping next to Marcus at night, and its massive body was warm like a furnace against the freezing cold. Marcus named the creature Brutus, after a character from an old Earth story about loyalty and betrayal, and he talked to it. In the long dark hours when the jungle screamed around them, Brutus did not understand the words, but he seemed to understand the meaning behind them. By the end of the first week, Marcus had stopped thinking about survival, had started thinking about something bigger. The galaxy had sent him here to die alone and forgotten, but instead he had found something that nobody had expected. He had found a friend, and together they were going to do more than just survive. They were going to thrive. He had stopped counting the days after the first month because the numbers did not matter anymore. What mattered was that he was breathing and eating and growing stronger with each rotation of the planet around its distant sun. The jungle that had tried so hard to kill him in those first terrible days had become something else now. It had become his home. Marcus had built a shelter on a rocky hill that overlooked a valley full of strange trees that glowed soft blue at night. The shelter was made from the bones of predators he had killed and covered with woven plant fibers that he had discovered were naturally waterproof. It was not pretty, but it was strong, and it kept out the rain and the wind, and the smaller creatures that still tried to eat him when they got the chance. Brutus slept at the entrance like a guard dog, the size of a small vehicle, and nothing that valued its life came within 100 meters of their camp. The Shadowcat had healed well from their first fight, and now he was bigger and stronger than ever. His scales had grown back thicker, and they shimmered with colors that Marcus had never seen before, like his body was adapting to the presence of a human in his life. Marcus had learned to read the planets moods over these 3 months. He knew that when the sky turned purple, it meant an electromagnetic storm was coming, and he needed to get to shelter before the lightning started. He knew that when the ground made a low rumbling sound, it meant the burrowing creatures were migrating, and he needed to stay off the soft soil or risk falling into their tunnels. He knew that when the flying hunters made a specific screaming cry, it meant the air toxicity was changing, and he needed to move to higher ground where the poison could not reach him. The other prisoners who had been sent to this world had died because they tried to fight the planet. Marcus survived because he learned to listen to it instead. He had found a spring of fresh water by following Brutus one morning. When the creature went to drink, the water was clean and cold and tasted better than anything Marcus had ever drunk in his life. He had started a garden near his shelter with tubers he had discovered growing wild in the valley. The plants had tried to poison him the first time he ate them, but his body had adapted after a few days of sickness, and now they were one of his main food sources. Humans were good at that kind of thing. They were good at adapting and changing and finding ways to make hostile environments into homes. It was the thing that made them special, even if the rest of the galaxy had forgotten. The broken emergency beacon sat in the corner of his shelter, and Marcus had spent 6 weeks taking it apart and putting it back together. The damage had been deliberate, just as he had suspected, and whoever had sabotaged it had done a good job. But they had underestimated human stubbornness. Marcus had salvaged parts from his drop pod and combined them with components from the beacon and created something new. It was not a distress signal because he had no interest in begging the Coalition for rescue. It was a video transmitter with enough power to reach the monitoring satellites that the Coalition kept in orbit around Death Worlds to confirm that prisoners had died. He could send a message to anyone in the galaxy, and they would have no choice but to receive it. The question was what message to send. Marcus thought about this for a long time while he sat by the fire at night with Brutus curled around him like a massive scaly blanket. He could send a plea for help, and maybe someone with a conscience would hear it and come to save him. He could send a message to his family on Earth to let them know he was still alive. He could send a challenge to Admiral Vethkora and tell the alien exactly what Marcus planned to do to him when they met again. But in the end, Marcus decided to do something different. He decided to send a message that would make the entire galaxy question everything they thought they knew about humans. He picked up the fishing rod he had made from the hollow bone of a creature he had killed and strung with plant fiber that was stronger than any synthetic line. He walked down to the lake he had discovered in his second month on the planet. The lake was beautiful, with water that shimmered in colors that had no names in any human language, and fish that were not really fish swimming beneath the surface. Brutus walked beside him like a loyal hound, and the two of them moved through the jungle without fear because they had learned its secrets and earned its respect. Marcus sat down on a rock at the edge of the water and cast his line. Then he turned on the camera he had built into the beacon and started recording. He did not look like the same man who had been dropped on this planet 3 months ago. His body was lean and hard with muscle built from constant survival, and his face was covered in scars that told stories of battles won. His eyes were different too. They were the eyes of a predator, now calm and patient and absolutely certain. Marcus smiled at the camera, and the smile was not friendly at all. The galaxy had tried to throw him away like garbage. Now he was going to show them exactly what they had created. The transmission arrived at Coalition Command at 3:47 in the Morning Standard. Tammy, a junior communications officer named Telex, was working the night shift when the alert came through, and she almost deleted it without looking because she thought it was corrupted data. Then she saw the origin coordinates, and her 4 hands froze over her console. Nexus 7. The no return. Planet nobody had ever sent a transmission from Nexus 7 because nobody had ever survived long enough to send one. Alex called her supervisor, who called his supervisor, who called the admiral on duty, and within an hour, Every important person in the sector was crowded around a holographic display in the main command center. The video began to play and the room fell completely silent. A human male sat on a rocky outcrop beside a lake of shimmering liquid that changed colors in the light of the alien sun. Behind him, mountain ranges rose into a sky of purple and gold, and forests of glowing trees covered every surface as far as the eye could see. Human was clearly weathered and scarred, with marks on his face and arms that told of dozens of fights, but he was also clearly healthy, with muscles built from months of survival and eyes that were calm and alert. He was alive, and he should not have been alive. "Hey," the human said to the camera in a voice that was casual and almost amused. "So I know you probably thought I would be dead by now, and I'm sorry to disappoint." He gestured to something beside him, and the camera moved to show a massive creature sitting at his side. It was a shadow cat, one of the deadliest predators on Nexus 7, and it was lying next to the human like a pet dog, waiting for its master to throw a ball. "This is Brutus," Marcus said. "He is friendly mostly." The shadow cat yawned and showed rows of teeth that could have torn through starship armor, and every xenobiologist in the room made a sound of pure disbelief. Marcus picked up a fishing rod made from bone and cast his line into the shimmering water. "I fixed your beacon, by the way," he said without looking at the camera. "It turns out it was not as broken as you thought it was, and funny how that works." There was a long pause while he watched his line, and the only sound was the alien wind and the distant calls of creatures in the jungle. "I have been doing some thinking these past few months," Marcus continued, "about the Coalition and about how you treat humans and about how you sent a 23-year-old to die on a death world because he had the guts to stop a war crime." He reeled in his line and checked the bait and cast again. "The thing is, you never actually studied us, did you?" he said. "You looked at our technology level and our short lifespans and decided we were useful as soldiers and workers, but nothing more than that. And you made us junior partners in your grand galactic project." Brutus made a rumbling sound, and Marcus reached over to scratch behind one of the creature's ear-like structures. "But here's what you missed about humans," he said. "We are not built for any one thing, and we have no claws and no venom and no armor and no special abilities that make us dominant in our environment." He caught something on his line and pulled it up to show the camera. It was a fish-like creature with many fins and scales that sparkled like gems, and he held it up for a moment before tossing it to Brutus, who caught it out of the air and swallowed it whole. "We are generalists," Marcus said. "Adapters, and that is our power, and we do not conquer environments like other species do." He looked at the camera, and his eyes were hard. "We join them, and we make friends with them, and we become part of them." The room and Coalition Command was completely silent, and every being present was staring at the screen with expressions of shock and fear. Marcus stood up and stretched and looked directly into the camera. "I am not sending this to ask for rescue," he said. "I am sending it to let you know that I am still here, and I am going to keep being here, because this planet that has killed everyone you have ever sent is my home now." He paused, and his expression changed to something darker. "But Admiral Vethkora, I want you to know something," he said. "That Korvath ensign you were beating when I stopped you, and her name was Nira, and she died 6 weeks after my trial." The room stirred, because nobody had heard about this. "Suicide, they called it," Marcus continued. "They said she could not handle the shame of what happened, but I know the truth, and the truth is that you killed her just like you tried to kill me." His voice was calm, but there was something terrible beneath the surface. "I am not staying on this planet forever," he said. "And when I leave, I am going to find you, and it will not be today, and it will not be this year, but one day. You are going to look up and see me standing there with Brutus beside me." He smiled, and the smile was a promise. "And you are going to learn what humans do to people who hurt the ones we tried to protect." Marcus picked up his fishing rod and turned back to the lake. "Anyway, nice weather here and good fishing, so tell my captain I said hello." The video ended and the room erupted into chaos. But in the back of the crowd, Admiral Vethkora stood frozen with his mandibles hanging open, and for the first time in his long life, he felt something he had never experienced before. He felt fear. The transmission from Nexus 7 became the most viewed piece of media in Coalition history within a single standard week. Every species on every world in the galaxy watched the video of the human sitting by the lake with his impossible pet and his quiet, terrible promise. Officially, the Coalition Command declared it a hoax. They said it was fake footage created by human sympathizers to destabilize galactic unity. They said no human could survive on Nexus 7 because 47 other prisoners had died there. They said no creature on that planet could be tamed because the wildlife was too aggressive and too alien. But nobody believed the official story because the video was too real and too detailed to be fake. Unofficially, 3 separate rescue missions were proposed to retrieve Marcus Cole from the planet. All 3 were rejected, and not because the Coalition did not want to bring him back. They were rejected because nobody was sure they could. If a single human with basic survival gear could tame that world and befriend its deadliest predator, then what would he do to a retrieval team he did not welcome? The risk was too great, and so the Coalition did nothing. Admiral Vethkora requested a protective detail of armed guards to follow him everywhere he went. His request was denied because the Coalition did not want to admit that they were afraid of one human on a planet light years away. The Admiral stopped sleeping after that. He jumped at every shadow in the corridors of the station and flinched at every sound that might have been footsteps. His officers noticed that he had started checking behind doors before entering rooms, and that his hand shook when he was alone. A year passed, and then another. More videos arrived from Nexus 7. One showed Marcus building an actual house on the hillside with walls made from stone and a roof made from the shells of giant insects. Another showed him teaching Brutus to hunt specific creatures by using hand signals and voice commands. A third showed him exploring cave systems deep beneath the surface and discovering ruins that looked older than anything the Coalition had ever found. There were symbols carved into the stone walls that nobody could read and technology that nobody could explain. Another video showed Marcus standing next to a second apex predator that he called Junior. This one was smaller than Brutus, but faster, and it seemed to worship the human like he was some kind of god. The galaxy watched these videos with a mixture of fear and fascination. Human cadets in Coalition military academies started requesting transfers to dangerous postings. They called it Nexus training, even though no such program existed. The phrase Cole Protocols entered military slang, and it meant to adapt and befriend and survive against all odds. Instructors at the academies noticed that their human students were changing. They were more confident than before and less willing to accept the role of junior partners that the Coalition had assigned them. They walked taller and spoke louder, and they looked at other species with eyes that held a new kind of challenge. Something was shifting in the galaxy, and everyone could feel it. On the 3rd anniversary of his exile, Marcus sent one final transmission. He was standing on a cliff overlooking the jungle with Brutus at his side and the planet's 3 moons hanging heavy in the sky behind him. He looked older now, with more scars and more muscle and eyes that had seen things no human was meant to see. 3 years, he said to the camera. I have learned a lot about Nexus 7, but I have learned more about myself and about what humans really are when you strip everything away. He paused, and the wind blew his hair across his face. We are the species that looked at wolves and saw friends, he said. We are the species that looked at fire and saw tools, and we are the species that looked at the stars and saw a home. Behind him, something massive moved through the trees. It was bigger than Brutus and bigger than Junior, and it made sounds that shook the air like thunder. Brutus did not growl or show fear. Instead, Shadowcat purred with recognition, like he was greeting an old friend. You tried to send me to my death, Marcus said. but instead, you sent me to my destiny." He smiled, and it was not a cruel smile anymore. It was the smile of a man who had found his purpose. "I am ready to come home now," he said, "but I am not coming alone." He turned and walked toward the tree line and toward whatever was waiting there in the shadows. The camera caught one last glimpse of his silhouette against the alien wilderness before the video ended. 6 months later, a ship of unknown design entered Coalition space. Its hull was covered in the bioluminescent plants of Nexus 7, and it glowed with soft colors that pulsed like a heartbeat. Scanners could not identify the technology that powered it, and weapons could not lock onto its strange shifting shape. The ship's crew was one human male and 17 creatures that should not have been able to exist in the same space as any sentient being. They moved through Coalition space like ghosts, and nobody could track where they went. Admiral Veth Cora was found in his quarters the next morning. He was alive, but his mind was gone, and he sat in the corner, rocking back and forth with empty eyes. Every surface of his room was covered in claw marks that went deep into the metal walls. Marcus Cole was never officially seen again, but the legends say that whenever a human is wronged in Coalition space, and whenever the powerful abuse the weak, there is a chance that you might hear something moving in the shadows, and if you are very unlucky, you might catch a glimpse of a scarred man with a fishing rod and a smile that holds no warmth. Beside him will be creatures that should have killed him, but chose instead to follow him across the eaves. Stars. The galaxy had sent humanity a message that said, "Know your place." Humanity sent back a fishing video and a promise that they would never forget. The stars belonged to everyone now, and the hunters had become the hunted.